You've probably stood at a funeral at some point in your life. Flowers, quiet voices, a body laid carefully in a specific position in a specific place surrounded by people who cared. It feels like a distinctly human ceremony, built by modern religion and modern grief. But the real answer is far stranger. Long before churches, before temples, before anyone wrote down a single word about the afterlife, your ancestors were already doing something remarkably similar. They were burying their dead on purpose, with intention, with care, and in some cases with objects placed deliberately beside the body. The evidence for this goes back much further than most people expect, and what it reveals about the ancient human mind is stranger than any myth about the origin of death rituals. To understand it, you have to go back over 100,000 years to caves in what is now Israel. At a site called Qafzeh, archaeologists uncovered the remains of early Homo sapiens deliberately placed in pits in curled specific positions. One skeleton, a child, was found with deer antlers resting against its chest. This wasn't the pattern of a body left where it fell, it was a placement. Archaeologist Erella Hovers, who has studied the site extensively, has argued that the deliberate arrangement and the presence of grave goods point toward intentional burial practice roughly 100,000 years ago. That number alone should stop you. Modern civilization, agriculture, writing, cities, all of it is a blink of an eye compared to that timeframe. And yet here, in the deep archaeological record, is evidence of humans already treating death as something that required ceremony. So what were they doing exactly, and why? The honest answer is that archaeologists cannot know for certain what your ancestors believed. There is no diary, there is no explanation carved into stone. What there is instead is behavior, and behavior tells you something belief statements never could. A body doesn't curl itself into a fetal position and end up buried under intentionally placed stones by accident. A child doesn't end up with deer antlers resting on its chest through random chance. These are choices, deliberate, repeated, pattern choices. And the pattern doesn't stop with modern humans. This is where the story takes its first sharp turn. For decades, scientists assumed that symbolic behavior, including deliberate burial, was something unique to Homo sapiens. Neanderthals, our close evolutionary cousins, were assumed to be incapable of this kind of abstract, ritualized thinking. That assumption has been steadily dismantled. At Shanidar cave in Iraq, archaeologists uncovered Neanderthal remains dating back approximately 60,000 years, found in a position suggesting deliberate burial. Pollen analysis from the surrounding soil, first published decades ago, hinted at the presence of flowers placed with the body, although this specific detail has remained a subject of ongoing scientific debate. What isn't in serious dispute anymore is the broader pattern. Archaeologist João Zilhão, whose research has focused extensively on Neanderthal cognition and symbolic behavior, has argued that Neanderthals used pigments, wore personal ornaments, and very likely buried their dead with intention. His work has been part of a broader shift in how scientists understand Neanderthal minds, not as lesser precursors to modern humans, but as cognitively sophisticated beings capable of their own form of symbolic thought. Doesn't that completely change how you picture a Neanderthal? The image most people carry, the hunched, grunting caveman, doesn't match a species that appears to have curled its dead into careful positions and marked their passing with objects that meant something. Archaeologist Paul Pettitt, whose extensive research focuses specifically on the origins of human burial, has argued that the emergence of deliberate burial represents one of the clearest archaeological signals of a fundamental shift in how early humans understood their own existence. Burial isn't simply about disposing of a body. It's about marking a boundary, a recognition that this individual mattered enough to be treated differently than the world around them. That recognition required something remarkable. It required your ancestors to hold a concept in their minds that had no immediate survival benefit. Burying a body carefully doesn't feed you. It doesn't protect you from predators. It doesn't help you find water. It serves no direct biological function at all. And yet it happened again and again across tens of thousands of years, across multiple species of humans on multiple continents. So what was actually happening in the minds of your ancestors when they buried their dead? The leading interpretation isn't about religion in the way you might imagine it. early burial likely wasn't driven by a fully formed belief in an afterlife or a specific god. It was likely something more immediate and in some ways more human. Grief memory attachment. The same neural and emotional systems that make you form deep bonds with the people in your life today were almost certainly present in your ancestors. When those bonds were severed by death, something needed to happen with that unbearable absence. Burial may have been one of the earliest ways humans learned to process loss, to mark it, to contain it, to give it a physical location instead of letting it dissolve into nothing. Grave goods reinforce this interpretation. Tools, ochre, shells, and animal bones found alongside ancient remains suggest your ancestors weren't simply disposing of a body. They were sending something with it, preparing it, continuing a relationship in some symbolic form past the point where biology alone would explain the behavior. This is where the story becomes genuinely strange. If burial required abstract thought, if it required your ancestors to conceptualize death as something more than a biological event, then burial may be one of the earliest pieces of evidence for a fully modern human mind. Before agriculture, before permanent settlements, before almost everything you associate with civilization. Death and the human response to it may be older than almost every other marker of what makes you distinctly human. Now think about what that means for you today. You still curl flowers into careful arrangements. You still choose specific clothing, specific words, specific locations for the people you've lost. You still feel the overwhelming pull to do something, anything, physical and deliberate in the face of an absence that otherwise has no shape. None of that is a modern invention layered onto raw biology. It's an unbroken thread stretching back through Neanderthal caves in Iraq, through curled skeletons in Israel, through tens of thousands of years of humans and near-humans facing the exact same unbearable problem you face today. The problem of loving something and then losing it, and needing to do something with that loss besides simply letting it disappear. Your ancestors didn't have language for grief the way you do. They didn't have therapists or elegies or funeral homes. What they had was the same aching need you have, expressed through the only tools available to them. A carefully dug pit, a curled body, a few objects placed with intention. So the next time you stand at a funeral, watching a body lowered carefully into the ground, surrounded by people who cared enough to show up, you're not witnessing a modern ceremony. You're witnessing one of the oldest continuous behaviors your species has ever practiced. A behavior that predates agriculture, predates cities, predates almost everything you'd call civilization. You've probably stood at a funeral at some point in your life. What you were really standing in was a 100,000-year-old conversation between grief and meaning, still being carried on, generation after generation, by people who never stopped needing to mark the place where love had to let go.